Major funding for KPBS Evening Edition has been made possible in part by Bill Howe Family of Companies, providing San Diego with plumbing, heating, and air restoration, flood and remodeling services for over 40 years. Call 1-800-BILL-HOWE or visit billhowe.com. And by the Conrad Trebas Foundation, Darlene Marco Shiley, and by the following. And by viewers like you. Thank you.
It's April 15th, also known as Tax Day in the United States. Thanks for joining us. I'm Maya Trabulsi. Because of disastrous flooding in some parts of San Diego County earlier this year, people here are being given an extension to file. But as KPBS reporter John Carroll shows us, this is still a busy day at San Diego-based TurboTax.
You can tell it's not a normal day as soon as you walk up to Building 2 at Intuit's TurboTax headquarters in the Torrey Highlands neighborhood. Music is in the air, and some people are dressed in costume. It has the distinct feeling of summer camp. The summer camp theme really comes to life inside with more camp decor and more costumes, and hundreds of TurboTax employees on their laptops taking chat questions.
It's all hands on deck with all of our employees. We're trying to help people make it before the tax deadline and file their taxes.
The flooding that impacted hundreds, if not thousands, of San Diego County residents earlier this year led the IRS and the state to extend the tax filing deadline to June 17th. Former Southcrest resident Jessica Calix texted me today that the extension was a lifesaver. But if you don't have to wait to file, don't, says Lisa Green Lewis.
Unless you were impacted by the disaster and just can't file, or you're missing something, I would try to file because the average refund is close to $3,000.
TurboTax employees, who are usually in their offices, are on the cafeteria floor today helping answer simple questions. If the questions aren't simple, experts, they're called camp counselors today, are there to help.
I can jump in and guide them, whether they're going to need to go see an expert or whether there's something I can answer really quickly, and then whoever is on the chat can answer it and move on and take another chat. Is it ITIN or is it the ITIN?
I asked Skelly if she was stumped by any questions today. She's worked here for more than 20 years, so no.
I've had everything today from I got a K-1, how do I put that in, how do I handle my LLC, all of the weird stuff that comes out at the last minute that people go, oh yeah, this is why I put this off, because I didn't want to have to deal with this.
Some tax tips from Green Lewis include having everything you need right in front of you before beginning the filing process, like W-2s and 1099s. And if you're itemizing, don't forget receipts that show expenses that are deductible. She says more than 90% of people take the standard deduction, which is way up this year for all filers. This crazy scene wraps up at midnight tonight when this room returns to its normal function as a cafeteria. Another tax year in the books. John Carroll, KPBS News.
The San Diego region is set to receive $39 million in federal funding for the care of asylum seekers and other migrants who cross the border. And KPBS border reporter Gustavo Solis joins me now in the studio. Hi.
Hello.
Nice to have you here. Tell us, how big of a deal is this for our region?
It's a massive victory. That's how the immigrant advocates are calling it, right? This funding represents a $10 million increase compared to last year, so it could be put to a lot of good use. And it's important to remember that this is going to address the street releases that have been happening, right? Border Patrol will drop off tens of thousands of migrants in San Diego at the trolley stops, and this money will help bring a little bit of order to that situation.
And we're talking $39 million. What is this money going to be used for?
Well, that's why I asked the county. Actually, the same exact question I asked the county yesterday. The answer, the official answer, too early to say. They just got it and they're working out the finer details. But I do know that County Supervisor Nora Vargas has said she wants to use some of this money to help create a migrant transit center, right? A place where migrants who are being dropped off can come, receive some services, and then make their way out of San Diego. Some of the money can also be used to help existing shelters right now with Catholic Charities, and Jewish Family Service has this kind of infrastructure there already. And what they're really calling for, what the advocates are calling for, is collaboration. They want a seat at the table, and they want to work together with the county to decide how this money is spent. And actually this morning I had a chance to speak with Kate Clark, who's a senior director over at Jewish Family Service, and this is what she had to say.
We have continued and will continue to advocate for all levels of government to be at the table, to have an active voice. We all have the opportunity to be part of the solution.
Well, Gustavo, what are the most pressing needs now that need to be addressed?
Yeah, I think it's important to understand the population that we're working with. You know, data we have shows that well over 90% of these migrants, they don't stay in San Diego. They have friends, family, relatives in other parts of the country, and they only really need a little bit of help for those 1 or 2 days while they get their bearings straight, while they work out their travel arrangements. Something as simple as Wi-Fi, phone charger, some food, maybe a place to stay the night. Now, there are more vulnerable populations. I'm thinking migrants who come into San Diego in rough shape, right? The people who are sleeping outside in the open-air detention centers in San Isidro or Jacumba, they might need more medical training. They may not have friends or relatives here in San Diego, so they might need a little bit more help, maybe on the legal front as well. But those are kind of the more pressing needs right now.
Obviously, you've been following the story for a while. Tell us, what do you see happening next?
Yeah, I think it's worth noting that when it comes to the spending, it's a huge victory to San Diego, but not necessarily the rest of the country, right? If you look at the program this funding comes from, it's a FEMA program. This budget actually cut it by almost 20%. And at the state level, Governor Newsom's proposed budget is cutting migrant services by $150 million. So long-term, you know, San Diego got a great pool of funding, but outlook, long-term funding for these services is kind of under threat.
Some great reporting. Thank you, Gustavo.
Thank you, Maya.
Well, we have some quiet, somewhat chilly weather tonight still in place, but there will be a warming trend that eventually builds later this week. And we're going to be down into the low 40s in places like Escondido and 51 into San Diego. Off to the east, there's the split there, 38 into Mount Laguna, but certainly much warmer into Borrego Springs. As we turn the page, we want to take a look at the gradual arrival of the dry season, but we'll look at that in just a bit. Our prospects for rainfall. The reservoirs are in great shape, though, for now.
Jury selection for former President Donald Trump's first criminal trial started today in Manhattan. This case stems from payments made to adult film star Stormy Daniels during the 2016 campaign. Julia Benbrook has the latest on the trial that's expected to stay in the national spotlight for weeks.
The state charges are related to a hush money payment to adult film star Stormy Daniels in 2016 to cover up their alleged affair. Trump denies the affair and has pleaded not guilty to 34 felony charges of falsifying business records. This is the first time a former president has faced criminal charges.
Nothing like this has ever happened before. There's never been anything like it.
Prosecutors allege Trump was a part of an illegal scheme to undermine the integrity of the 2016 election and worked with others to falsify company records to hide the payment used to pay for Daniels' silence.
At its core, this case today is one with allegations like so many of our white-collar cases.
There are 42 questions listed on the juror questionnaire. Jury selection will continue until a panel of 12 New Yorkers plus alternates are seated. The selection process could take weeks.
It's not a matter of who do you prefer, what your political leanings are. It's can you put that aside and judge the evidence from a fair and impartial basis.
The former president will be mandated to attend the trial and is expected to regularly address its developments.
It's a case that should have never been brought. It's an assault on America.
The trial could last as long as 2 months and is expected to include testimony from well-known witnesses. Reporting in Manhattan, I'm Julia Benbrook.
All eyes are on Israel today as the country's war cabinet met for a second day in a row. It's weighing how it will respond to the wave of drones and missiles launched at Israel by Iran over the weekend. As Cole Higgins reports, world leaders, including the U.S., are urging restraint.
President Joe Biden addressing the weekend's unprecedented escalation of violence in the Middle East for the first time publicly.
The United States is committed to Israel's security. We're committed to a ceasefire that will bring the hostages home and preventing conflict from spreading beyond what it already has.
Nearly 350 projectiles were fired at Israel by Iran and its allies in Iraq, Syria, Yemen, and Lebanon. Israeli military officials say 99% of the munitions were intercepted with the help of the U.S., Jordan, and the UK.
We have been coordinating a diplomatic response to seek to prevent escalation.
Israel, however, is considering not only a military response, but also a diplomatic one that could further isolate Iran on the world stage. The country's war cabinet met Monday, deliberating for hours over the timing and scope of a response to Iran's attack. President Biden and other world leaders urging restraint and seeking de-escalation.
We don't want a war with Iran. We don't seek to widen and broaden this conflict. We don't want to see things escalate.
Jordan's foreign minister says he believes Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is using the fight with Iran to distract from the war on Gaza.
Now, as the international pressure on Israel to stop the aggression in Gaza continues, invoking a fight with Iran is something that we believe he thinks could dilute that pressure and could take attention away from Gaza.
Cole Higgins, KPBS News.
And the impact of Iran's weekend attack against Israel is being felt here in San Diego. Ruth Mastron is a volunteer at the House of Israel. She has family that lives close to the Gaza border and visits every year. And she says the moment missiles made their way to Israel, she called to check on her loved ones.
It happened while we were all here, and we all immediately got on the phone and called every relative, every friend, how are you? Are you okay? Where are you? What's going on?
And she says that her family stayed in bomb shelters Saturday night while she's unsure of what is going to happen next. She feels reassured by how Israel intercepted the rockets. And to our north, pro-Palestinian protesters halted traffic in the Bay Area. They completely blocked southbound lanes on the Golden Gate Bridge. Demonstrators chained themselves through tubes to other people inside cars. It's a formation known as a sleeping dragon, and it makes it very difficult for police to detain participants. Officers called tow trucks to remove vehicles protesters were using. More than a dozen people were arrested. Lanes began to reopen after the hours-long closure. And just 10 days into its deployment, the USS Boxer returned to San Diego for repairs. KPBS military reporter Andrew Dyer says it's the latest in a series of mechanical setbacks that have delayed the ship for years.
It's not unusual to see Navy warships steaming in and out of the bay, and when the amphibious assault ship USS Boxer turned to come in, it appeared routine. Except the Boxer had just left and wasn't expected back for months.
Typically, that's not something that you see happen shortly after the ship were left port.
That's Brad Martin, a retired Navy captain and former amphibious squadron commander. He's now a senior policy researcher at the RAND Corporation, focusing on strategy, operations, and the supply chain. He says the Navy is having problems keeping its ships in good shape.
In the case of the Boxer, I don't know all of the circumstances. This type of thing is more common than it ought to be, and it is something that the Navy is going to have to deal with, especially given that a lot of the ships are getting old. And as they get old, they are harder to maintain.
The Boxer went into dry dock in San Diego in 2020 just as its sister ship, the USS Richard, was coming out. The Richard was destroyed by a fire a month later, leaving the Navy short 2 big deck amphibious ships. When the Boxer tried to get back to sea in 2022, a major engine component failed. It was repaired and failed again. The Navy investigation found cost-cutting from an effort to meet repair schedules contributed to the problem. Martin says the Navy's surface fleet has been struggling to keep on schedule for years.
I think it is absolutely fair to say that the Navy has not historically done a good job managing the surface ship maintenance requirement.
Last week, Chief of Naval Operations Admiral Lisa Franchetti announced the Navy and Marine Corps are launching a deep dive into the maintenance issues with amphibious ships. She also said the Norfolk, Virginia-based USS Wasp is also looking at delays after undergoing the same overhaul as the Boxer. Andrew Dyer, KPBS News.
Dozens of families are looking for a place to stay as San Diego County's Motel voucher program winds down. Since January, roughly 2,200 families have relied on the program to keep a roof over their heads. The deadline for the program is May 11th, but last week, about 200 families were given a 7-day notice to move out unless they can prove that they were eligible for the program. More than 100 households did show proof. The rest did not.
It's been rough. It's just, day by day. Nothing's moving very quickly. The county wants us to start transitioning out of hotels back to our places, but they don't understand is the landlords for renters like me are not moving quickly.
This Friday is also the deadline to apply for help through FEMA. For more information on deadlines, how to apply for aid, and other resources, you can visit kpbs.org/weather. The latest government inflation report confirmed a lot of what drivers might be thinking. It's really expensive to drive a car right now, even as the cost of new and used autos have fallen off of their peaks. Karen Kaifa takes a look at what's pushing up costs.
Right now, it starts at the gas pumps, but other driving necessities are more expensive too, and drivers have a few areas this summer where they'll be able to seek some relief. An uptick in gas prices helped fuel overall inflation last month, but that wasn't the only auto-related driver. According to the March report from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, auto insurance costs have spiked 22% over the last 12 months. Auto maintenance and repair costs are up 8.2%. Greg Brannon, director of automotive research for AAA, says insurers simply have more costs to cover.
One thing that we can't ignore when it comes to the cost of insuring a vehicle is that cars are more expensive today than they were years ago.
And while prices for new and used vehicles have fallen off of pandemic-era peaks, newer features that make a car safer, Brannon says, like advanced driver assistance systems, make repairs more specialized.
They also make it a little bit more expensive to repair. And it's not just that. Labor rates are up at body shops and repair shops around the cost of parts. And it's also often that you're having to wait for those parts to arrive.
Brannon says drivers looking for some relief can effort lower mileage by carpooling, for example, but don't cut corners on maintenance.
When things are tight, it's actually more important to do that maintenance then, because you're less likely to be surprised by a big repair bill, and the vehicle is also more likely to perform well and get the fuel economy that you're looking for.
And fuel economy will become more important during the summer driving season when more demand typically pushes gas prices higher. AAA says if you are in the market for a new or a used vehicle right now, do the research on all of the potential costs and consider whether something smaller or maybe a hybrid might be a little bit more cost effective for you right now. In Washington, I'm Karen Kaifa.
Breast cancer is the second most common cancer among women in the U.S., and the CDC says regular mammograms are the best way to find the disease early. But a new study reveals that women are facing numerous barriers in getting this potentially life-saving screening. Mandy Gaither has a look at the research.
It's an important weapon in the war against breast cancer. Mammograms can help detect signs of the disease earlier when it's more easily treated. But a new CDC study reveals many women still find it difficult to get this recommended screening.
Those of us who have been working in this space have known that these barriers exist. We've known this for years.
The U.S. Preventive Services Task Force recommends mammograms every 2 years for women ages 50 to 74. But researchers say only about 66% of women in that age group get a mammogram if they have 3 or more health-related social needs. Those can include food insecurity, feeling socially isolated, lack of reliable transportation, lost employment, or a reduction in hours. The cost of accessing health care was the biggest barrier.
Institutions need to be aware that they have to ask about these social determinants of health. And if you ask, then you can have a plan in place to address the needs.
Electra Paskett, director of the Center for Cancer Health Equity at Ohio State's Comprehensive Cancer Center, says healthcare providers need to do barrier assessments in order to identify things like financial issues that may stop people from getting mammograms and find solutions to address them.
I'm a 3-time breast cancer survivor. My first cancer was diagnosed 27 years ago on a mammogram. It was extremely small, the size of my pinky, top of my pinky, and I'm still here. So mammography works.
For Health Minute, I'm Andy Gaither.
And the CDC says mammograms are available at no cost to the patient through most private health insurance plans and Medicare. It's the new year for Thai, Lao, and Cambodian San Diegans. And this weekend, KPBS reporter Katie Hyson witnessed what organizers say was one of the first LGBTQ+ celebrations of the holiday.
Diversionary Theater in University Heights was packed with all the signs of a Thai, Lao, and Cambodian, or TLC, New Year. Colorful sarongs, the pageant princess, crispy rice salad, and shots of Hennessy. The DJ is what she calls Khmer, queer and Khmer. Opening for the more traditional dance performances was a Thai drag queen. Organizer Dina Johnson has been envisioning this safe space for years.
This is actually like my dream. Being a lesbian in this community, especially being Laotian, we don't get to be open.
It's the first LGBTQ+ TLC New Year celebration in the country that co-organizer Margaret Marshall is aware of.
Yeah, we were nervous, because we didn't know how this was going to be perceived in our community, but folks were like, yeah, we need this.
They sold out. Katie Hyson, KPBS News.
Well, we've had a cool start to the week, but the temperatures are going to be on the way up. A warming trend will take over through midweek, and some of those deserts will get kind of steamy once again. It is April after all, and we will see some patchy morning fog, especially along the coastline and within a few dozen miles of the coast into the next few mornings, especially Wednesday night to Thursday morning and then later this week as well. But we'll begin to see the pattern change. We've had a good wet season, and it continued into April. But as we'll soon show you with a future radar, the storm track is diverting to the north. It's looking and feeling more like April across Southern California. Tonight, partly cloudy, 51 for your low. Not many weather worries tomorrow. We have warm weather building. We're in transition to a steamier time in the deserts off to the east and the interior. But overall, a nice weather day for us here this Tuesday with highs around 88 in Borrego Springs there. But 54 up atop the mountains and the high ground. Mount Laguna looking good. And into areas like El Cajon, 77, 67 for your high in San Diego. Wednesday turns a little warmer, still breezy up in Northern California. But a pretty decent setup here for us if you like to be out and about. And future radar, you're going to notice as we spin the wheel forward, the storm track is diverted to the north. So the northern Rockies are seeing some snow. This storm system slams way up into Canada. And high pressure is generally protecting us. So we're not going to expect to see much in the way of precipitation. Even when the winds shift eventually in through the latter part of the weekend, we do expect to stay dry and precipitation free. So overall, temperatures slowly hover and rise into the upper 60s at times here later this week. The coast is going to be held in check by that maritime air, the ocean water temperature kind of stabilizing our local weather near the coast. But as we step inland, here you're going to notice a rise up to 78 Wednesday, a big warm up there. Sunshine, great weather. We'll have a little bit of a setback here with a shift in the breeze there into Friday. Cooler once again Thursday and Friday into the low 70s. Morning clouds and low clouds may even lead to some fogginess, but ultimately brighter afternoons. Into the mountains we go here, rising to the upper 50s Wednesday, then somewhat cooler. Mid-50s went out for Friday and Saturday. And in the deserts, we're on the road to the 90s. Wednesday spiking at 94. Not quite as warm by Friday, but Saturday another rise to 96 degrees. I'm AccuWeather meteorologist Jeff Cornish for KPBS News.
And here's another look at today's top stories. Today is tax day, but some San Diegans are being given extra time to file. That's due to devastating floods back in late January. The IRS and state have extended the tax filing deadline to June 17th for those who live in areas impacted by the flood. For those who do not and still haven't filed, you can file for a 6-month extension before midnight tonight. The San Diego region is set to receive $39 million in federal funding for the care of migrants who cross the border. Advocates are calling this a huge victory that represents a $10 million increase over last year. County Supervisor Nora Vargas has said that she'd like to use some of the money to fund a migrant transition center. Advocates, including Jewish Family Service, say they want to be included in that process. Just 10 days into its deployment, the USS Boxer returned to San Diego for repairs. It's the latest in a series of mechanical setbacks that have delayed the ship for years. The Navy has been left short 2 big deck amphibious ships after the Boxer went into dry dock back in 2020, and the USS Richard was destroyed in a fire. The Navy and Marine Corps say they are launching a deep dive into the maintenance issues with amphibious ships.
I'm Jeff Bennett. Tonight on the NewsHour, our exclusive interview with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on the war with Russia and the uncertainty around U.S. aid. That's at 7 after Evening Edition on KPBS.
And here's a look at what we're working on for tomorrow in the KPBS newsroom. NPR's Morning Edition will have the latest on the Senate's impeachment proceedings for Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. And KPBS Midday Edition is exploring why more young people are gravitating toward trades careers. You'll hear from a 24-year-old welder and also an Imperial Valley College dean about their lithium programs. And you can find tonight's stories on our website, kpbs.org. Thanks for joining us. I'm Maya Trabulsi. Good night.
Major funding for KPBS Evening Edition has been made possible in part by Bill Howe Family of Companies, providing San Diego with plumbing, heating, and air restoration, flood and remodeling services for over 40 years. Call 1-800-BILL-HOWE or visit billhowe.com. And by the Conrad Prebys Foundation, Darlene Marcos Shiley, and by the following. And by viewers like you. Thank you.